So as I mentioned before, this particular platform allows us to publish our work in online. That the platform is also provided by UMS, and I believe the platform is under our PEP department. So we hope that with this event, it will brief us and enrich our knowledge on this particular platform. And I hope that everyone can take this opportunity to find out any information on how we can publish in OER. So for your information, this is one of the KPI in our KRA1, whereas each program have been allocated a certain number of publications. No? So for you to publish your material, it's maybe in the form of notes, in the form of slides, in the form of article. So if anything, please contact or please ask Dr. Kenneth later after he gave his briefing. So before we start with the briefing, I will convey my thanks to the organizing committee, especially Dr. Cho, and my thanks to Dr. Kenneth as well for providing his time to give this particular briefing. So that's just a little bit note from me.
Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Sufyan. Sorry about the lag in the connection. Actually, today I'm actually broadcasting from home, but not from the office because our office is being sanitized. So we have to broadcast from home. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Sufyan, for inviting me to the Faculty of Engineering. On behalf of PEP, today we have with us Nora. So Nora is on standby. She is in charge of the administration of the OER system. And we also have Puan Salmi here, and who is in charge of our e-learning coordination, as well as Puan Eugenia. Puan Eugenia is actually our new OER and our MOOC coordinator. Okay, so I will proceed directly to the presentation. And in today's session, we are going to do two things. The first thing is we are going to introduce you to the concept of the OER system at UMS. And the second thing which we are going to do is to assist each and every one of you to get registered on the system so that you can start using it immediately. Okay, so let me start with the presentation first, and I will introduce you to the concepts of the open educational resources, and then we proceed to the next part, which is your registration and your practical session. Okay, I will project the screen. Okay, I hope you can all see the screen, and don't worry about the content because I will share the PDF file with you later. Can you all see the screen? Just type in the chat. Yes?
Good.
Okay. Yes, okay. So we proceed. Thank you very much. So we proceed to the presentation itself. Now, the first thing which I have to introduce you to is the concept of open educational resources. Some of you may have heard about open OER, but most of us have published in the open access journals. So you will see this logo over here on the first page, which is Ccbi. Now this represents an open license, or what is known as a Creative Commons license with attribution. So the CC is actually referring to Creative Commons, and the symbol there with the human is actually referring to the attribution. This means that the lecture notes, for example, in this particular presentation, are Creative Commons, means you can download them, you can reuse them, you can re-edit them, and you can share them again under your name, provided that you acknowledge the first author. So in terms of scientific publication, this is a kind of a publication where you get cited repeatedly based on your original template. Okay, now what exactly is open educational resources? Now, open educational resources refer to what is known as the content which is shared freely online. Now, I'll give you an example of what is how this benefits communities. For instance, researchers from poorer countries cannot access the paid journal where they have to pay and subscribe to journals. So in this case, the UNESCO has recommended open educational resources so that the disparity between you see there's discrimination between knowledge among communities is equalized. So that means some researcher from a poorer country who has no access to the resource can have the same access as the one from a more affluent country. So that's the whole philosophy of OER. Now, we come to the next step, which is the attribution. Now, when we publish in a scientific publication, we get attribution in the form of citation. So you will be cited, and that adds to your H index and your other indices for your basically for your reputation as a researcher. But in OER, how do we do that? So in OER, we have a different system which is based on a open licensing system, and I'll explain the open licensing system to you very briefly before we go into the details. Okay, now open educational resources refer to any kind of material. So it's teaching material, it may be your lecture notes, it may be your tutorial notes, it may be an ebook, and it can be either in a digital form, and this should be residing in the public domain. Now, what a public domain refers to is a repository online which is accessible by the general public. So it may be a repository where you have to have a password and a user ID, but the accessibility should be for all. That's the philosophy of the OER system. But in addition to that accessibility, we also have what is known as an open license. So the open license allows the person who wants to use it to access the material at no cost. There's no subscription fee, and this is allowing the material to be distributed freely. Now, what is the disadvantage and advantage of this kind of a system? The disadvantage is you cannot upload any kind of material which has either future commercializable value, means IP, intellectual property. So if you think that your material has any kind of IP, either as a material to be printed and distributed as a book or as an invention, we do not use the open educational resources repository. However, if you have material which you want to distribute freely, you will have an advantage, because when you deposit at the OER, you will be cited, and that increases your digital footprint or your digital identity value. Okay, that's the disadvantage, the pro and the con. Okay, now some of you who work with software may also be aware of the other ones, the free and open software, FOSS, open access, and the open data crowdsourcing platforms. So all of these are actually not going through a regular publisher. They are published at databases, and then you get the citation in terms of your digital linked back to your digital identity or your digital footprint. Okay, now among the open licenses, we have two types of open licenses. The first one is public domain, or PD. PD is generally referred to as CC0. We have creative CC0 means no copyright. Okay, so that is a PD, public domain license. And we have Creative Commons licenses. Okay, now with PD, public domain, if you deposit your material, your digital material in a public domain repository, people will download it, reuse it, and remix it, but they do not have to acknowledge you. Now, this is actually a loss for you, because you have created that content, you have spent a lot of time creating the content. But there are some artists, scientists, and the content creators who create knowledge in the public domain because of the digital footprint, because your research material or your creative content actually contains a meta tag. So these tags are tracked as they are accessed, and this gives them some kind of a feedback about their accessibility as well as the analytics of that data. But what we are interested in as researchers at the university is what is known as the Creative Commons licenses. Now, what is a Creative Commons license and how do you apply for it? It is very simple. In the university, you may be aware of intellectual property and copyright. So if you want to apply for instance, intellectual property, a patent, you have to go through the PPI. If you want to apply, for instance, for a copyright, you may have to go through a publisher or through MIPO. That's the conventional copyright route. But in the case of the Creative Commons licenses, you can actually apply for a Creative Commons license directly from CC website. Okay, I will show you that website. So this is Creative Commons. Some of you may be aware of it, and some of you may not be aware of it. Creative Commons allows you to select a license and embed it based on your specific criteria. We will go through these criteria in the next slide. Okay, so these are the various kinds of licenses which are available at Creative Commons. Now, when you want to create this license, you have to go to the website. The website will ask you specific questions and it will generate this icon for you. Now, this icon you can incorporate into your slides or your lecture notes or even your research article, and then you can have a metadata tag for this particular license. Okay, now there are 6 types of licenses and they have variations. So the first type is the CC-BY. So this is Creative Commons Attribution License. When you have this kind of license on your article or your content, it means that the end user, the one who downloads it, can reuse it as such as it is. He or she can remix it, means they can use part of your content and re-edit the remaining part. However, they can also commercialize it. So that's one aspect which is allowing this content to be commercialized. They can use, for instance, if you have a photograph, they can reuse that photograph and convert it into an advertisement or into an article and make money out of it. So CC-BY is the most open license that allows freedom of usage. We also have the last type of license, which is the CC-BY NC-ND. What this means is that this license is Creative Commons. It requires attribution, but this content cannot be commercialized. So you have the $ with the crossover, and then no derivatives. No derivatives means the material should be used as such. The photograph, for instance, cannot be edited, cannot be cropped, and no modification can be done on that photograph or that content. So these are the 6 types of licenses, from the most flexible, which is CC-BY, to the least flexible, which is CC-BY NC-ND. Okay, that's the least flexible, the most restrictive. Now, when we publish at open access journals, if you look at the logo below, you will see CC-BY. So generally, most of the journals which are pay-per-view journal, which have a APC, they will have a CC-BY license attached to that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, CC-BY is the least restrictive license. However, our UMS OER does not use a CC-BY license. It uses an alternative license to protect the depositor or the user from being commercialized. We don't want our content to be commercialized because some of it may have some value in terms of the intellectual property. So our UMS OER has an alternative license. I will go through that during the course of this lecture. Okay, now this is the most restrictive license, as I mentioned. This material cannot be commercialized, and it should be displayed or deposited in another repository as such. Now, there may be cases whereby you have a CC-BY license on a lecture note from, for instance, a university in Harvard. So you can download that lecture note, CC-BY. You can modify it for your respective class or your respective course, and you can deposit in the UMS repository. It's perfectly okay. The only thing you need to do is cite the original source, the original author of that material. So this is the philosophy of CC-BY. It permits you to reuse other people's or other creators' content. Now, when you want to generate your open license, if you have noted on the first slide of this presentation, I have embedded a CC-BY license. So in order to create this CC-BY license, we go to the website, which is a CC-BY, the Creative Commons website, and we check certain items in the box. Okay, I can do a demo to you by sharing my tab later, but this is relatively simple to do. So you just go to the CC-BY website, the license chooser, and then you have a Creative Commons window which pops up, and it'll ask you just few questions. So it'll ask you, do you want adaptations of your work to be shared? If you say yes, it will create a license automatically here. So CC-BY. If you say yes, as long as others share alike, it will create a different icon here. Okay? And if you allow commercial use of your work, you just click yes or no. So that's just one key which you need to click. So you just click here and you click here, and then you generate your license. Now, if this license, which is known as the CC-BY license, can be appended to your lecture note or your creative content. It can also be embedded into a photograph. So you'll have a CC-BY license on the photograph. And you have what is known as a free culture license. If you select commercial use, allow commercial use of your work. If you select no, this icon here, free culture license, goes away. Now, when you create content using this kind of platform, you get a high amount of accessibility for your content. So your webometrics or your, what do you call, your digital footprint goes up. You have more accessibility to your website, your web page, or your creative content. Okay, so that's the way in which this kind of license functions. Okay, now, in addition to the content license, CC-BY license, we have to add our metadata or metadata to the item or the object, the digital object. So for the purpose of the attribution, we use what is known as a TASL attribution. Okay, so T is the title of the work, A is the author or the authors, S is the source, which is the link to the digital content, and L is the license. So this is the TASL license. Now, for instance, if you use a photograph from a Creative Commons website or from the Google, which is you get a photograph using a Creative Commons search engine, you have to attribute it using the TASL attribution. Okay, so you have the title of the work, the author, the source, and the license. So these have to be incorporated into the slide below the photograph or the creative content. That's very important when it comes down to using this license, because this metadata is tracked by websites and search engines. Now, if you already have a web page, if you want to, if for instance, if you have your own web page or your blog, you can incorporate the license by copying the code generated after you fill in the form. So all this form is available at the CC-BY, the license chooser portal at the Creative Commons. Okay, so all you do is add your title of your work, your name, your URL, and your source, the link. So the link will be our UMS Oer repository. I will demonstrate that to you when we go through the step-by-step with the Oer, UMS Oer website. So this will generate HTML code, and you can embed this HTML code into your web page. Okay, so that's how the metadata is generated. Now, a search engine like Google will search through the internet, and it will detect your content purely based on your metadata. And the advantage of using this kind of OER and the CC-BY license is that your Google Scholar will capture all this information, and it will appear in your Google Scholar, provided that you have given the right metadata in terms of the author names and the university affiliation. Okay, now, one of the things which can be done with OER material is that it can be repurposed. A significant amount of material from universities overseas, for example, from Harvard, MIT, is actually available as OER. So if you refer to their websites, for example, MIT has MIT Open, you will find a lot of material which is shared under the Creative Commons license. Now, if you have, for instance, a lecture note on engineering from MIT open source, you can download that lecture note. You can modify it based on your syllabus. Then you can redeposit it at UMS OER, provided you link it to the original content creator using the original metadata. Okay, so that's one of the advantages of the OER, and that's the philosophy of sharing OER. So this actually increases, again, your citations as well as your visibility in the digital domain. Okay. And the other advantage is for the Myra. Now, this OER is digital content. So for Myra, it is classified, at least until last year, it was a non-peer-reviewed publication. So that adds to you can add this, just as we add the newspaper article and other articles into our Myra, or when we do our audit, you can add this as one of the non-peer-reviewed publications. Okay, that was at least until last year when the audit was done. I don't know the current situation, but they will definitely permit you to add non-peer reviewed publications into the overall Myra scores. Okay, now we will go into the OER itself. I think some of you may have seen this, and some of you may have also deposited, because when I did a check last week, I found that your faculty has about 15 contents deposited at the OER. Okay? So this is the OER repository. I will briefly go through it, and then we will revert back to Nora, and Nora will be assisting us to register, because some of you may not have registered in the OER repository. Now, this OER repository is powered by a search engine or a platform known as DSpace. Okay, this DSpace, just as we have our JurCon system, so our UMS journal management system is by Open Journal. This one is actually powered by DSpace. Now, the advantage of the DSpace is that anything which you deposit here, because of DSpace, it will be accessible on Google search or even on Google Scholar. It's linked back to the OER repository. Okay. So in order to open an OER repository account, you have to register using your email ID. So you can actually go to this website just as I'm speaking. You can go to https://oer.ums.edu.my, and you can click on register if you have not already registered. Now, Nora is on standby. She's the admin. And the moment you click on register with your UMS email, she will generate account for you at the repository. So you can access it using your login. Now, for this repository, please use a distinct password which is separate from our UMS HR Online. Don't use the same password, because this system is not linked to our UMS HR Online ID. So create a unique password for this. Don't use the similar password as your UMS password. Okay. Okay. Now coming back to our license of our UMS OER. Our UMS OER supports the following license. So it's attribution, non-commercial, share alike. I will explain to you the legality of this so that you are all clear about your content and regarding what you can and cannot deposit over here. Okay, now I will assume that you have two types of content when you are working as an academic staff at UMS. The first type will be the lecture notes and other content which you share freely with your students. The second type of content is your research data and your IP. It may be in the form of, for example, your industrial design or a patent or a copyright. So please do not deposit anything which has IP value now or in the future at the OER. The reason why I'm telling you this is, for instance, suppose you have an industrial design and you want to file an IP for industrial design under MIPO at PPI, and you deposited your industrial design in the UMS OER. Now, because UMS OER is a searchable database, when a patent agent searches for your industrial design, they will find it over here. And that's not what you want. So please do not deposit any material which has future IP value. Even though we have put a dollar sign here, no dollar sign, the material can still be accessed and such. So that's my advice, or based on experience. So you don't deposit anything over here. You also do not deposit any material over here which you want to publish in a journal which has a copyright transfer agreement. Okay. So suppose you have deposited, for instance, some material, some data over here, and you want to publish in an Elsevier journal which is going to be copyright. You have a copyright transfer. In that case, you cannot deposit it over here as well, because they will find it out when you do a plagiarism check. But you can deposit material here which you want to share again using a Creative Commons license. For instance, if you have open access journal and you want to put in a file or a table here which you can access from open access journal, you can use this system. So that is some of the things which you should be careful when you use open educational resources, open access systems. Okay, our license is CC, which means it's Creative Commons. Attribution means everyone who downloads your lecture notes will have to attribute you. The dollar sign means the material cannot be commercialized, and the share alike means everyone who uses your material will have to share under the same license, means they'll have to carry the same license for their material. So that in some way protects you as an academic staff from your content being misused. Okay, I'll give you an example of what can happen and what other lecturers have reported. Earlier, when there was no OER repository, some of the students who attended lectures would download all the lecture notes, because that time we use pen drive. So we share the pen drive, they download it, and then they go to another university and they repurpose the lecture note. They just change few things and then they present it as their own lecture note. Now, many of the lecturers were objected to this, but there was no system to bar the student from reusing lecture notes. However, when they use at OER repository, they will have to attribute you. They cannot escape from that responsibility. Okay, so that's one of the advantages of using UMS OER. So if they use it, they have to attribute you. Okay, now we go into the step-by-step procedure, and you can do this even after this tutorial is over. You can do it in your own free time. Then the email will go to our admins, Nora and Zulfadli, and they will give you a verification based on the email you send. So first thing you need to do is you submit your email. Please use your UMS email. Okay. Once you send an email to the UMS OER admins, they will send you an email which will verify your email. You will receive feedback in your UMS email. Then you go to update your profile. You can add your photograph or other content, and then you can deposit your content. So the procedure is very simple. It may take around a day because sometimes our admins will not be checking the email continuously, but currently Nora is online, so she's checking. So whoever registers now will automatically get an email for their OER. Okay, now comes we focus on the database structure. Okay, registered. Okay, I'm seeing the chat window. Some of you have registered, and okay, so please register, and then we can, when I open up the tutorial window, you can go through step by step with me. Okay. Okay. Now comes the structure of the database inside the UMS OER. Now, for those of you who are familiar with IT, the OER is actually a database which is searchable. That's all it is. It doesn't have any interactive features. You can't interact. There's no JavaScript running inside. There is no other plugin running inside. It's purely a database. So it's a database which is having metadata, and then that's searchable on a search engine. Okay, that's the thing about DSpace. So DSpace is the original platform on which we have built our OER repository. Now, how is the content categorized there in the system? It's categorized as communities and collections. Okay, now communities means you can only deposit content at your respective faculty or your institute. So that's the community, or even your center, Pusat. So we have divided it into communities. So it becomes easier for you to track content when you are going to apply, for instance, for your Myra score. It's easier when you categorize it as community. So that's the way it was categorized. And the second type is collections. So I will go into the specific types of collection. So whenever you want to deposit your content, you ensure that you deposit under your respective community, which is your faculty or institute or Pusat or center, or else it will not be captured by the Myra. When you do your Myra score, you will have difficulties in identifying where it comes from. Okay, now most of us have collaboration with other faculties, so we share information. So this is where you have to decide, is the author from, for instance, from FKI, FKJ, FSSA? So who's the author who will deposit? That is at the discretion of the authors. Okay, that's something which you should consider. However, all the authors will be attributed, but the community will be from the respective faculty or the institute. And the collection is of specific types. Okay, so we'll go into that in the next slide. Okay, what are the different types of collections you can deposit into the OER? And the answer is almost anything. Okay, so you can deposit e-articles, which are short articles, which can be a photograph or a diagram with article or a text, okay, that you convert to PDF. You can deposit ebooks. So for ebooks, you need to get a EISBN number or an EISSN number from the Perpustaka Nagara, from the National Library. Now for the ebooks, if you need to generate a EISBN or EISSN number, you can either do it directly or you can approach the Pusat or Center for E-Learning, and we will assist you in doing the EISBN and EISSN numbers. Okay, that's the ebook. So some of the faculties have the Majala, the magazines, right? The bulletin. You can deposit that as ebook in the system. And for the magazine or the bulletin, you will have to have a EISSN number. So ISSN number applies for the content which is going to be published periodically, like monthly. For the ebook, you have EISBN. So we can assist you with that. E-notes. Each and every one of your lecture notes, I suggest or I recommend that you deposit it here as PDF file. Now, this will ensure that your e-notes or your lecture notes are not misused. So e-notes are one of the things which you can deposit here. I will go through that in the next slides, how you create your e-note for deposit. Then you have e-posters. Almost all of your posters from all of your, for instance, your symposia can be deposited here as a PDF file. And then you have educational videos. Okay, now each and every one of the recordings, because nowadays we do recordings for our class, our Google Meet, you can deposit the educational video here as a link. Okay, so you can, each lecturer or each faculty basically has potential to create a lot of content. Okay, that's the advantage of OER. So you have the new avenue for content creation in addition to your index publications. That's why we are keeping on going around asking everyone to populate the repository, because in the long run, it will help you. Okay, so you have multiple options to deposit content. So, okay, so how do we create content? Okay, the simplest content is a PDF file. So you take your lecture note, you incorporate a license in that, and then you deposit as a PDF file. You can deposit video files, but the videos cannot be deposited in our OER as a MP4 file. They must be deposited as a link to a public database. Okay, the reason for this is because our OER cannot does not have the capacity to store, or there's no capacity for large data files. Okay, so videos, you can please use the YouTube or the Vimeo or Google Meet, and then you can upload the link here. Lecture notes as PDF content, the e-books and the e-articles can be deposited as the respective content as EISBN and EISSN. So for the Myrasco, actually the e-book actually counts as a book. Okay, there are certain terms and conditions which we must fulfill prior to depositing the content on the website, on the OER website. Now, the reason is because after you submit the entire set of content, I will go through the tutorial step by step. You will arrive at a point at which you have to sign off on a end user license agreement, some kind of EULA, just as you have in your apps and other software. So that EULA states that the content is not copyrighted material and you share it, and which is the Ccbi, the NC share alike. So you have to share it. So you have to agree to that. So in order to do that, you have certain terms and conditions which you need to fulfill, because if you deposit, for instance, content which is already copyrighted, you will have conflict with, for instance, the publisher. Okay, so you cannot deposit, for instance, the copyrighted content, which is the article. For instance, if you have an article in an open access journal, you can have the PDF here. But if you have, for instance, article in an LCBA or Springer journal, which is not open access, you cannot deposit that over here, even though you're the main author, because when you signed off your copyright transfer agreement with the journal, you have transferred the copyright to the journal. So that material cannot be deposited here. Second one is intellectual property and potential IP. Please do not deposit any material which you think will have an IP in the future. This includes even a diagram or an industrial design or just prior art. You cannot deposit it here because it will be searchable on the search engines from WIPO and the other the intellectual property search engines. If you are depositing content from your students, please check for plagiarism using Turnitin. or else it will come back to you as the author, as the main author of that article. The next one is author contribution. If you have a multiple set of authors, or even your students, now for instance, some of the faculties have deposited their students' final year projects in the Oer repository. Okay, these are final year projects, the ones which you do not deposit at the library, or the documents you can deposit it here as the students' work. They can also be the assignments as well. So for this one, you need to deposit it in your name because the student cannot access the Oer repository. So in case you deposit the student's work, please ensure that the student's name is included in that article or in that particular metadata, or else again it may create problems if the students in the future say that it was their content and reused by the lecturer. So that's one aspect which you should be careful with. The other one is repurpose material. So repurpose material, what I refer to is the lecture notes from other lecturers. So for instance, I have a friend in UPM and he or she shares the lecture note with me under Creative Commons. I can deposit that, but I need to again attribute the original source. So that is repurpose material. And finally, you need to agree to share under the license of the UMS OER. So after you finish the process of depositing, you will see a last window which says share under the license of UMS OER. And then once you click, it will share and it will generate a link for you. Okay, I will go through the step-by-step process after I finish this presentation, and I will show you how to deposit your content at UMS OER. Okay, so what do you need for the different kinds of files? So this is the video file. Now you have created a video using either YouTube or on your Google UMS Google account. Now, in order for this to be deposited at OER, the link should be publicly visible. For instance, like suppose I create lecture note on UMS in my Google Drive. Okay, that's ums.edu.my Google Drive. So that one is not visible to the public because the sharing options are set to either shared with known email or shared with the people who have the link. Okay, so that one cannot be used as OER because it's not in the public database. But if you create a video on YouTube and you share it in the public as a public content, then you can deposit the link in the OER, okay, and it gets attributed to your name. So when you want to create a video, you need to create the certain set of files, or else when you want to deposit it, you will have to again go and create a thumbnail and so on and so forth. So I'm giving you what you need to have when you want to deposit a video thumbnail. Okay, so you have to have, the first one is the video thumbnail, which is the first, usually for the video, we create a thumbnail. And that thumbnail is what you need in a PDF format. Okay, that's the first thing that you need. The second one is specific information related to the video. So that may be some text or some content related to the video. The metadata, for example, this video is recording so and so and so forth. So that's the abstract of the video. You need the author names of the video. For instance, if the video was made by your students or by your fellow researchers, you need to have their names, the tags or the keywords for the video, and the link to the public database, which may be at YouTube or Vimeo or any other public database. These are the things which you need to keep ready before you deposit your video files. Okay. Now, with video files, again, be careful of the copyright usage. Okay, you cannot use any kind of, for instance, if I'm having a t-shirt which says Honda or BMW, and then I go and create a video with that t-shirt, that's actually commercial content. So wear a neutral attire, also background. You cannot use public the face of public in the viewers. For instance, you go in a restaurant or in a mall and you have a video, you have to blur their faces. Okay, that's one of the requirements of usually YouTube will ask you to blur the faces or they will take down your video. So that's one of the things which you should be careful when you use OER, because that's going to become open source material, open access, and then that video can also be used and certain people's faces can be captured on the system. So be careful with that condition with videos. Okay, so for video files, you have to create the video file first and upload it into YouTube. For those of you who have a YouTube account at UMS YouTube under your Gmail, under your UMS Gmail ID, you can deposit there. But please ensure that in the YouTube, you select the Creative Commons license. So YouTube offers two kinds of licenses. So they are the Creative Commons CC-BY license and the YouTube license, which is almost like a copyright. Okay, so that you have two types. So if you want to deposit at the Ccbi, the Oer repository, you must select the Ccbi license at YouTube. Okay, and then you deposit the link at UMS Oer with the thumbnail and the other information. And you must also ensure that that is no broken link. Okay, so there should be no links which are broken. So usually YouTube will not have broken links unless they take down your video. So there should be no issue when you use YouTube or Vimeo. Okay, for the other types of files, for instance, audio files, you can also deposit them as audio file. And for instance, for SoundCloud. Now, with regard to the Oer repository, another thing which has been recommended by UNESCO is the accessibility for all. So that's one of the philosophies of Oer. Accessibility for all not only means accessibility across gender and the economics as well as geographical, it also means accessibility for those who have disabilities. So generally for the Oer, you can also deposit, for instance, the audio files which have been developed for example, the visually challenged individuals. You can deposit audio text of your respective lecture notes. Okay, so that's one of the things about the Oer system. It also encourages the accessibility for all. Now, for lecture notes, it's far simpler. You have to prepare your lecture notes in a presentation format. Please ensure that the lecture notes do not contain any copyright material. Okay, if you are using our UMS Office 365 to create your lecture notes, you will not have a problem because all the content, you incorporate photographs inside, they're already having a CC-BY license. Okay, but if you upload any pictures inside, or if you embed any pictures in a lecture notes, please ensure that they are not copyrighted, or else it will violate the copyright because the metadata of that particular object, the photograph, will be tracked by the search engines. So you can incorporate the CC license on the first page of your lecture note. You can use the TSL attribution in case you have used any other content inside your lecture note. For instance, in your lecture note, you have used a table from MIT from another slide. You can use that table or their photograph, but again, you need to attribute using the TSL. So this is a little bit difficult because each picture will have to have that link below to the title, author, the source, and the license. You should have that below each photograph. It appears to be a big, you'll see a lot of text, but you need to do that. We cannot avoid the TSL attribution. Then you convert your lecture note to PDF format because you can only upload PDF files into the system. You can use PowerPoint, but don't do that because, again, it cannot be tracked if people change. It's difficult. And then you have them ready for upload to UMS Oer. Okay. Now, I will go through a tutorial after I finish this presentation. I'll guide you step by step with the basic upload of content. Okay, so you need to upload, if those of you all who have registered already and Nora may have approved, you can log into your UMS Oer account and we will be on standby to help you as you do this process. Generally, when we do it face to face, we will assist you from your terminal itself, but today I will assist you remotely. Okay, now, last time when some of the lecturers deposited content at Oer, they stated that they could not be seen on the Google Scholar. By right, the moment you deposit your content on the repository and you get the email saying that your content has been accepted, you should be able to see it on your Google Scholar within the next day. It should appear as an article in your Google Scholar. Now, if you cannot see it, it means two things. One, you have the settings on your Google Scholar do not automatically update your profile. Or it means that you have not used the same name as you use for the other scientific publication. So that is why it's very important to have your name as it is in your publications. The moment you deposit it at OER, you should see it on your Google Scholar at least within 24 hours. So this is one of the advantages of using the OER repository. Okay, now comes the important part for us as academic staff is how do you capture it under UMS SMPPI? Now, you must remember that the OER at UMS is not linked to the UMS SMPPI. It is a standalone system. So the SMPPI will not capture the data directly from the OER repository. So you need to do a manual upload. So what you have to do is once you have deposited the content at the OER repository, okay, and received your confirmatory email, you have to deposit the link at UMS SMPPI. Now this is done by, you go to SMPPI, just as we do for publications. You go to publications, under publications, you have publication version 2. That's the latest upgrade in SMPPI. You go to that and you deposit it as a new publication, add a new publication under general category, because this is non-index. Okay, so remember that to add it under general category. If you add it under index, the person who verifies it at the SMPPI may reject it because it is a non-index publication. So the category you select is general, and then below the category in SMPPI, you have the subcategory for e-articles, articles, newspaper articles, and so on and so forth. So you select the appropriate article for your subcategory. For instance, if you have a tutorial, you can deposit it as a tutorial or a module, and so on and so forth. So you need to identify the category for your content. So you need to do this, or else it will, if it's not verified in SMPPI, it will not be captured in your ELNPT. So this is the part where you need to do a manual link. We have not linked our OER to SMPPI directly because, of course, when you set it up, you'll have a firewall and so on and so forth. So to reduce the burden on our IT, we have actually created as a separate repository. So this is how you link it to SMPPI. And the last one is the link to Smart V3. Okay, now the question about students who reuse your lecture notes, for instance, they go to other academic institutions, they get employed as lecturers, and they reuse your content. So for this one, I suggest what you do is all your lecture notes, and this is at your discretion, all your lecture notes you can deposit at the UMS OER. And when you develop your content every year or every semester, all you do is you insert the link to your lecture note. Do not upload the whole lecture note into your Smart V3 system. This has multiple advantages. One, it saves you a lot of time because you don't have to upload and download. Secondly, it's easier for the student to click on the link and download from the UMS OER. Now, our admin staff have access to the analytics. So every time someone downloads or uploads lecture notes into the UMS OER or any content, that is tracked by the analytics. So they will get a report at the end. Anytime they can get a real-time report, or at the end of the month, they can print out the report and they will know the traffic on the website. So that's the advantage for you. So if they access your Smart V3 and they download and upload, you have to go through the log files. If they do it, if you have content at the OER, it will be accessed via the link. So this is then advantage for you as a lecturer, but I leave it at your discretion because some of us may feel more comfortable to upload each semester because we modify the lecture notes, but you can have the original content over here. Okay, now we will go into the tutorial session, and the session is being recorded, so you can skip to this point in the video. It's around 10:25, right? So you can skip about 155 minutes into the video, which will be shared, and then you can find this tutorial again. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to open my OER screen. And if you have any questions during the session, please type in the chat window. For some reason, I cannot access the audio. Okay, I stopped sharing. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now we are finished the first part, which is the tutorial on the different aspects of the sharing of the OER content. I will now go through the OER website, and I'm going to do it very slowly. So please be patient with me because I'll take some time, because I want to show you specifically how to add the content. So I'll record that session. So I'm going to share the OER page. Okay, so that's, yeah. I go to the OER page. One second. Okay, I'm going to click OER. Okay. Okay, so this is the OER resource center. So this is the repository at which you can deposit all your content, and there is some information here for those users who are from the public. For instance, the public, if someone visits this website as an individual who doesn't have a user ID and password, which is the public, they can access all of this content by clicking on the respective links. Okay, so we have, I think there was some content. So you can click and you can see your content here. Okay, that's how you do it. Okay, let's begin the process of I will guide you through this process step by step, because some of the buttons, actually, because this is a open source software, so some of the buttons may not be so clearly visible, especially the one about the deposit the content. Okay, so I'm going to log in with my user ID and password. Okay, so that's, I log in. So I log in now. Okay, so now I have logged into my repository. Now I've logged in as a user at UMS using the same password as the same user ID as UMS, which is kanathar@ums.edu.my, but I have also used up the, once again, I have given a unique password, okay, to this. Okay, so if you have questions, please type in the chat window, and then I will refer back to that screen later, because currently I'm looking at the screen which I'm projecting. Okay, now in this one, I have different kinds of content. So I have created submissions. This is part of demos and other lectures. So I have submissions over here. Okay, so this is the archive submission. These are submissions which have been done previously, and these are unfinished submissions. So I can, if the submission is unfinished, I can click and I can select and I can remove the submission at this stage. Now, some of the lecturers ask this question usually frequently, is that once you have deposited a submission here as open access or under Creative Commons license, can it be withdrawn again? And the answer for that is actually no. Once you deposit it as an open access article or a content, we cannot withdraw it. We also clarified this with DSpace. Okay, so be careful. That's why I say before you deposit here, please do the due diligence and check for plagiarism, the IP, etc., as I mentioned earlier. Okay. Now, if you want to start a new submission, it's very hard to locate the button because it's right here. Okay, it's not a clear icon. It says you may also start another submission. So click on this first, and then you start your submission. Now, because I'm using an admin password and an admin window, I can see a lot of different kinds of things over here. So if you are from your respective faculty, you will see your window like this, but it may restrict you to your respective faculty. For instance, if I go for certain, for example, if I go to some, I go to my article, better I go to PEP. Okay, I go to PEP and I deposit the simplest one, which is a e-note. I want to show you how to deposit the simplest one, which is a lecture note. So I go to PEP, you go to your respective faculty, and I'm going to deposit a e-note. Okay, and then you click on, after you have done this, you selected your collection, you click on next. Now in your respective window, you may see only the your respective faculty as a content. Otherwise, if you deposit another faculty, you won't get attribution for your respective faculty, even though as an author, you'll get attribution. So in this, you type your author name. So I'm just going to type in for demo. I'll type in your, okay, so it's actually the first name is your surname, your father's name, and then you have, okay. So I'll deposit this. The title of the article is, for instance, is lecture note. I created one on plant So we'll do this slowly so you can learn the process, and I can guide you through any of the bugs which may come in, or the things which the glitches which may come in as you do it. Otherwise, later on, you can either contact me or Nora or Puan, Eugenia or Zul if you have any problem with this system. Okay? Because sometimes you may have some kind of glitch or some kind of the interruption. So remember something with this: when you put up the title, it actually becomes searchable as a on the search engine. So for instance, somebody types in Google search after deposit is lecture on plant genetic engineering, it will find a title here based on the title which has been listed in the name here. Okay, so if you have other title, you can put other title. If you have a date of issue, you can put in the date here. So if you don't have a date, it will not prompt you for the date. I'll just put by default for us, for our tutorial, we're going to use 2021, so it's August and 13. So I'm just going to use it by default. Okay, publisher. Now, if you have published any content under publisher as an e-article, which is open access, you can do it. You can key in the publisher name. If not, you cannot use, for instance, copyrighted material. You can't have a publisher name here. Okay, so that's only for the online publishers. For instance, your EISBN or EISSN self-publish, or what they call the indie publishers. Okay, some of the lecturers from UPM, and they have very interesting websites where they have indie publishers. They publish independently. They get their own EISBN, EISSN number, and then they can use their publisher name here. So that's independent or indie publishers. Then you have your citation. If you have a series report number, you can add it here. And you have identifiers. This is EISSN or EISBN number. Now for the lecture note, we won't have all these series reports and things like that. So if you have any link, you can add here, identifiers. So we don't add this. And then the article type. Now this is very important, that you select the right article type, okay? The type of article. So in this case, this can be, we can put it as a presentation, a recording, or we can put it as a technical report. So this depends on your type of your lecture. Okay. So suppose I'm using this lecture, I can generally use it as a learning object. So lecture notes can be deposited as learning objects. Some of the lecture notes which are interactive, which contain a certain amount of video element inside, can also be put in as learning objects. So for this purpose of this demo, I'm going to click on learning object. Okay. And the language, of course, you select by default is English. And you can go into next. So this data is saved. So this process is a little bit long-winded. It takes time. So in this one, I'm going to just key in some keywords. I just key in some keywords here, and you can have an abstract of your item. So example, your introduction to a lecture, you can have it here. Sponsors. Okay, now this is very interesting. For instance, we all produce our Laporan Akhir, our final project report for FRGS grant or internal grants. Okay, in case you deposit your your final report, your Laporan Akhir, you can actually put in the sponsor's name. For instance, you can put in your FRGS or Fundamental Research Grant Scheme, your code, your project code, etc. in this. And this again, it's captured in your Myra, because the final project report, which we deposit at the PPI, you can actually have it linked to this as open access, provided again it does not have any intellectual property or content which is having commercial value inside. So we can deposit it here. The description is, for instance, I just put the lecture note because I have to save your time. So I'm not going to key in the description. So I just put it as lecture notes on plant genetic engineering. You can try this as I'm guiding you, because some of you may have lecture notes as well. And then if you have an ebook or a YouTube link, you can add in this box. So once you're done with all this, you go to next. If you don't have it, you don't have it. So this is actually such. Okay. Next. Okay, now I have to upload my file. So the file actually is in the form of a PDF document. Okay, so I'm going to choose a file. I've created an OER folder, and I'm going to go to recent files. So documents, and I go to OER. Okay, I go to the OER file. I have a folder called OER, and I have a lecture note over here. So I'm going to deposit the lecture note here. I open it, and it's going to take as a PDF file. So then you have lecture note. Okay, so that will be accessed. And then, okay, now I'm going to, if you want another file, you have to upload file and add another. That's if you have, for example, 2 sections, lecture notes, then you add, upload, and add another. Okay, so then we go to next. So everything is being saved. And as this thing progresses, you can actually see the bar over here. Okay, so you have the lecture note here. Okay, now this is the review process. So look at the top of the screen, and my icon is moving here. So you can hear describe. So you have describe, upload, review. So this is the final step where you review your content. So I have the author, title, the date, etc., and I have the content here. If you review this article at this stage, and if everything is okay, you can proceed to the next step. Okay, this is where you need to read the fine print carefully, because this is the distribution license, and this is the final step. Once you click on this and you grant the license, you cannot take out the material again, because it's already gone in the Creative Commons attribution. So you have a public domain access to your article, so that becomes difficult to remove. Okay, so please ensure that you go through this entire end user, what is known as a distribution license or end user license agreement, and then you click on I grant the license. So you have, it says the work is original, you have the right to grant contained in this license, and so on and so forth. You must read the fine print and ensure that you comply with it before you click on complete submission. So now the submission has been completed. Once, okay, so we wait for a while for the server to respond. Okay, it's taking time to respond, so I click on complete submission. If you want to modify this at any stage, you can always click save and previous or save and exit, and it will save and exit at that stage. Okay, give it some time because it's okay. Okay, so once you click on complete submission, it will complete the process of submission. Okay, and this one will light up here because I'm accessing it from outside, from home, and the network is slow. It may take time to actually move on to this level. So don't close this tab when the process is going on, or else you will have, again, an issue with the submission upload. Okay, okay, so now it is. Okay, now it says the submission is, okay, I'll look back to my screen. Okay, it says the submission is complete. So please do not close the window until you arrive at this page. Now, how can you check your submissions? You actually go to my account here at this, and then you click on the submissions link. Okay, and then you will see your submission here. So the submission is actually coming up here. Lecture note on plant genetic engineering. Okay, that's where it comes up. Okay. I'm going to go back. And after the submission has been made in the system, you should receive an email. Okay, I will share my email window with you. 1 second. Okay, you should see my email window here. So once I have submitted this article into the system, you should see this window pop up here, and it says D space submission approved and archived. So once you see this kind of notification in your email, you will know that the submission has been deposited and archived, and you can proceed to the next step. It should also appear in your Google Scholar window maybe after 24 hours. You check after 24 hours, and you will see the link to your original submission appearing over here. Okay, so let's see what it says. So it gives me a link. I'm going to go back to my window here, the space, and a link. Okay, so when I click on the link, this is what you will see. Okay, I'm sharing the link tab. So you should see the file here, and you should see the eNote and so on and so forth. So your student, for instance, if you share this using UMS Smart V3, they will see this OER link, and all they do is click on the link, and they can actually access the content. So, okay, so that's, you can see it, I think. I check. Okay, so that's what the student will see. So this is a very efficient way at managing your Smart V3 system, because you can actually deposit your lecture notes and you have complete traceability of what people are accessing in your system. Okay? So you see the lecture note here, and then you can, it's exactly as you deposited it. Okay, now if you have used images, I will just clarify this. If you have used any kind of images here, for instance, this is a self-drawn image, but if you have used an image like this, okay, this image is actually from the UMS Microsoft Office system. So it's using a Bing image. So these images are actually from the database. So these images which are in the UMS Microsoft Office 365, they have their own attribution, which will appear as a metadata file. So in this case, you don't have to add the TASL attribution to each and every image. Okay. Bing search engine. So they will appear, you can embed them directly from the UMS Office 365. Okay, so that's how you use the OER for the deposit of content. Okay, so you have any questions related to the content deposit? Is it clear, or do you want me to go through the procedure again? So I look at your chat window because for some reason I cannot hear the audio. Sorry about that. You have any questions on the, you can type in the chat window if you have any questions. Is it clear about the deposit of content? Okay, how to get the CC license? Okay, Dr. Sufyan asked the question. Okay, I will go through step by step. Okay, I will open up. Yeah, I will open up the website. I will share now soon. Okay, so I will open a website for you. Wait, give me a second. I will just go to license chooser website. Okay, license chooser. Okay, give me a second. I just share my tab, okay, with you. I have to share tab. Okay, share. Okay. I'm going to copy the link from this URL. I'm going to copy this URL, Control C, and I'm going to share it with you in the chat window so you can try it out yourself. Okay. This is your license chooser for your Creative Commons. So if you refer to your chat window, I have put up the link over there. Okay, now I'll go through the website and share how you do it. It's actually very, very simple. It's just one click or two clicks. Okay, this is the Creative Commons it's actually supported by UNESCO, and because they want to facilitate the open licensing. As I mentioned, they want to create equity, global equity. Now, all you need to do is go to this link, and then you need to fill in this form. Okay, now there are the basic things which you need to do. So if you have yes, allow adaptations of your work to be shared, yes, or you can click on yes as long as others share alike. Okay, look at how the license changes. Okay, so when it was yes, it had only Ccbi. When you click yes as long as others share alike, it comes Ccbi, and then you'll have this share alike, which means that they have to share it under the same license. If you say allow commercial uses of your work, no, okay, you will have your $sign appearing here. Now, you must note what happens when you do this kind of restrictive license. There's a thing which appears here which says this is not a free culture license, which means that somebody who wants to use your work cannot use it freely. So when you revert back to yes, it says, okay, there's a green icon here. So this is the free culture license, which means that people have the freedom to reuse your work. Okay, now when should you use this no derivatives or no is, okay, so 1 second, I will show you this one. Okay, when should you use this no derivatives this no derivatives license? Okay, so this is allow adaptation of your work to be shared. No. Okay, this is in situations where the data cannot be altered. For instance, if I have a picture of a group photograph of a politician with other set of politicians, okay, and then suddenly somebody wants to like defame that person. So what he or she does, they put in they Photoshop and they insert a picture of somebody else, a criminal with the politician, okay, and that is actually a node, that's a derivatization. So this derivatization comes into many aspects. For example, social media, or also for data. For example, you photograph a object and engineering design, and you don't want people to modify it because that's your original art. So in that case, you have to use this particular one, which is no derivatives. So you'll see the equal to sign, which means no derivatives, means people can copy, they can share it, but they cannot modify it. So these are unique circumstances where you have to use the no derivative license. Okay, that's about it. So once you have finished this part, which is the basic, let me share the basic one. Yes, CCBY. Okay, once you have done this, you have to fill in this for attribution. Okay, so this is the attribution. So let's do this part. And this is very important because usually we only select the license, we don't select the attribution, so people don't know who it is. So let's say, for example, this is lecture note. Is the title. You can give your lecture note title. Attribute the work to name will be Kenneth. This will be searchable again on the search engines. The URL, for example, the URL will be your ums.edu.my or any other URL. If you are using your blog or your Facebook, you have your URL here, okay, YouTube URL, okay. So that you create your URL, www. Then your source, you can attribute to it, and you can use other permissions. So these are not really important, but what's important is the attribution of that source, which is this one. This one you need to state the source, and you can create the format. For example, this is audio, video, text, and so on and so forth. So for example, if it is a text format, I just select the basic, and you can create a XML file. Okay, so this is what you do. So now when you have done all of this, what you will see is here, you will see the code here. So you can copy this icon. You just copy this icon here, and you can paste it in your website. So you copy this part. This is attributed. This lecture note by Kenneth Rodriguez is attributed listens to a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 international license, because this is the version 4.0. Earlier, there was a different version. So this is the latest. So you must copy this and paste it in your respective lecture note. And if you have a website, you can actually copy this one. This is the metadata file. So those of you all who are using the HTML, you can copy this and you can link it to your website. Okay. So choosing the license is relatively easy, and you don't have to go through the process of registering and like with MyPo and so on and so forth, because this is a open license. Okay, so that's the procedure for the licensing. Okay, is it clear? Yeah, sure, sure, Dr. Lillian. That's actually going to be shared by our coordinator, because he has access to the video file. For each picture with CC license, we need to include TSL by ourselves, or it's automatic when we do the repository? No. To answer this, Dr. Norzilavati, right? So for this one, for each picture, yes. Just as you know, our student put in the thesis, the SUMBA, the source under each diagram, it applies for the license with the photographs as well. Now, I've given you a lecture note in which I use the UMS Office 365. So when we use UMS Office 365, we actually have the links to the Bing picture search engine. So when we use Bing, the Bing will automatically insert the CCBY into the photograph. Okay, but if you're using independent photographs, you need to use the search, the TSL attribution. Okay. Okay, so Prof. Chu has asked if I upload commented lecture slides to provided by the publisher, is it okay? So Prof. Chu, regarding this one, okay, regarding publisher slide, these cannot be deposited in the OER because they have been developed by a publisher. They actually copyright. If it's non-copyright, if the publisher, for example, is also CCBY, you can ask them whether they are free to share, and you can upload the slides from the publisher. Okay. So that, I hope that answers the question, Prof. Chu. So Dr. Sufyan asked, so is it self-declare? The website will not check the content. Yes, it is self-declare. The website will not check the content, which means that, okay, for this question is, to answer the question, Dr. Sufyan, is you self-declare, but if the content is actually copyrighted and if it's found out by a search engine, the content will be taken down either by the or they may issue a summon, like a kind of summon. But if it's YouTube content, if you deposit copyright material, usually if there's a copyright strike, they will take out the material. And in fact, I think now YouTube has policy, if it's more than 3 copyright strike, they will actually take down the channel. Okay, that's the content thing. Okay. Okay. So Dr. Emma has asked, can you show an example of how to share open access journal content? Okay, so Dr. Emma, for that question, what we have to do is when we want to share an open access journal content, generally we have to share the, just as I showed you for lecture note, you have to share the PDF file of the open access journal content. Okay, open access journal, I refer to the journal which, when you have the article itself has CCBY inside the article itself. So you will see on the first page of the article, CCBY. That one you can share inside the OER. But I'm telling you, I'm advising you not to share that content because it will create a conflict for the search engine. For instance, if you share your content, okay, suppose you publish your article in, for example, PLOS, Public Library of Science journal, which is open access, so you have paid for that. Now, suppose you deposit the same article in the OER repository, okay? The PLOS has more visibility in a search, but your article will have a lower level of visibility when you use UMS OER. So it will create a conflict. For example, someone searches for your article. Example, they look for your specific user ID and your article title. There will be an issue of conflict. So for open access articles, it's not recommended that you share them twice. Okay, you can share, but not recommended, because when you search, you will have a search engine conflict because it will look for 2 articles deposited at 2 different repositories. And in any case, right, when you have an open access article, it is captured by our SMPPI and the MIRA. So it's redundant when we share it inside the OER. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Emma. Okay, so thanks, Prof. Any other question?
Hello.
Dr. Young, can you please type, because I'm having a problem at home with my internet. I cannot hear I cannot hear the audio. Dr. Young had a question. On this. Nora, can you hear Dr. Jung's voice and type? Because he has asked a question. I saw the speech icon moving, but I cannot hear. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jung. Yeah, I asked mine, but there's no clear answer. I can recall there's a class at UMS at the issue a while ago. Result from issue lecture. Students in the class is also now they are sharing lecture. Okay. So regarding this question about there was a case where I recall this case where a student who is not a student entered the class, recorded the lecture, and then he or she issued the content online, right? So by right? Okay, this is the way the policy works with regard to the the video recording. Okay, so when we start recording the session, for instance, this YouTube, Google Meet record, it will ask you. It will say the session is being recorded. Do you have permission to record? By right? Nobody can record you without your consent. So the student is actually in breach of that. He or she has violated that legal aspect of the content, basically content creation. So in the lecture hall, technically you are the content creator because you are standing there, you are delivering the content, so you are the content creator. Now if anyone wants to record your lecture, and then they need to take permission, whether they want to record it for personal use in their machine or in their or deposit online. So technically that person can actually be challenged in court for recording without your permission. And this not only applies to class, it also applies to, for instance, the recording delivered on open the platform like Google Meet or Zoom or the whichever platform we use, okay, online. So I hope that answers your question. You cannot, the student must take permission from you, Dr. Jung, before they actually record. Okay, so make that clear in your class. In fact, before I do a Google recording, I inform the student, do I have your permission to record? Okay, for sharing lecture and video and note online. Okay, for regarding the note, right? Okay, to answer the question, the second question is sharing lecture and video note online. Okay, now suppose you share it. Okay, look at it from two aspects. You look at your smart learning management system. Okay, UMS Smart 2 and Smart 3. If you look below the right at the bottom, there is actually a license there. And that is also a license. You can look, I can open up the website for you if you need to see. Give me a second. Okay, I will just open and I will scroll down and show you the license. I will show you the license. Smart. I will share the smart. I will show you what exactly is meant by the open access license. Okay, so let me go down. Okay. Okay, if you look at the bottom of the page, can you see this icon here? It's CCBY non-commercial, which means that the lecture notes deposited by all of us are Creative Commons attribution. They have to be attributed to you, but they cannot be commercialized. So that means any lecture note deposited in the UMS Smart V3 is actually having a specific license attached to it. Okay, that's the license here at the bottom of the page. Now, suppose we deposited as OER, the license is even more restrictive. It is having another element to that, which is non-commercial and share alike. So that means if somebody accessed your content and then they used it in any of those ways, like they shared it under, for instance, commercial, then you again have the right to take action, provided you had the evidence of the student sharing. So these are things which need to be looked at. To answer your question, Dr. Jung, these are things which need to be looked at by looking at their respective license. Okay. So currently we don't have a policy or guideline, because when we share, actually we are still guided by the MCMC, the Multimedia Act. Okay, so we have to refer to that in case of a legal conflict. Okay, Dr. Jung, does that answer your question? Any other question or comment?
Yeah, please everyone, if you have any question, just type in the chat box. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Madharin. Yes, you okay. No, after submitted, okay, it's like this. Now, suppose you are going to submit your content and you decided, for example, in the first semester, you have deposited lecture note version 1. After some time for the next semester, something changed in the lecture note and you want to resubmit, you can resubmit the lecture note as a separate item. But once you submit it at the first instance, it's difficult, or it's impossible to actually remove it unless you contact the admin and you ask them to remove out the article, because when you deposited it the first time, you have actually created the metadata and it's searchable. So we have to go through the entire process. So I suggest to you, if you have version 1 and version 2, after you submit version 1, you modify and submit as version 2, Dr. Madharin. Is that answer your question? Is it compulsory for the faculty to have this? Dr. Lillian asked. So this depends on, I will revert back to the coordinator for your respective faculty and your Timbaland Deccan to answer that question. Because we have actually, when we do our planning at UMS, we have a certain number of content which have to be deposited under the respective KPIs. Okay, so I revert back to perhaps your Timbaland Deccan for the academic can answer that question. Okay, yeah, that is one of the key result areas for our KPI. So I think we have a certain number of content which needs to be submitted under the respective key result areas. But in any case, whether it's a key result area or beyond that, this will actually help you to get better visibility. That's the whole philosophy of the whole thing. Okay, that's very good, Dr. Sufyan has stated. Okay, Dr. Yong, in that case, everyone can go online and watch our lecture and no need to attend the university to become. Yeah, this is actually one of the questions which we debate over many times. So regarding the open university, okay, suppose, okay, let's look at it. What the IPTS do, the private universities, what they are doing is that none of their content is available online. Okay, because they are having commercial courses. If they deposit it online, then they will destroy their bread and butter, the public model, their private model of commercialization. But in the case of UMS, we have two, basically the PLUMS, the plums, they actually are doing a a private model. So that in that case, it's advised that plums do not deposit their content as open access, because then somebody can reuse that content and repurpose it. So that will destroy the economic model. But in the case of UMS content, it's actually public. We are publicly funded by taxpayers. So that's why we encourage the usage of the the content online. Okay, so we have still not reached that point at which, for instance, we offer courses for payment. For example, we offer for example, micro credentials, okay, as pay per view or pay per certificate. In that case, we'll have to rework that model once we arrive at that point. So that's a question which we will have to address sooner or later. Thank you, Dr. Jung. Hi, Dr. Siva. Yes, you will attract students. Yes, this is another one of the appeal of the OER system, the Open Educational Resources. In fact, MIT was the first one to start it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the 70s, they actually had some kind of repository which was accessible, and then it goes global. And MIT was the first, and that is one of the point which attracts the students to that faculty, because they view the content online, collaboration, and so on and so forth. Dr. Prof. Chu has asked another question regarding the penalty for infringement. Okay, so penalty for infringement is because in Malaysia, actually it works like this. So for instance, we have an international service provider for our content. It may be Google or YouTube or Zoom and so on and so forth. So we'll be distributing content via that service provider or via that platform. But in the respective country, we are still governed by the Multimedia Act, or the multimedia laws in the respective country. So now this is why we ask everyone to either not to use copyrighted material. Now, what will happen in a legal context if a company, for instance, if a company finds out that you have utilized its copyrighted content online, they will not sue you at the first instance. They will not come and say, okay, but they will look at the accessibility of the article. For example, if you have 10,000 downloads, and they have lost about $9 per download, they can actually sue you for the amount of the downloads. Okay, and that Prof is it can add up to a lot, because if they have 10,000 downloads and it's $9 per download, they can actually sue the infringement, the person who infringes that, for about $90,000 and maybe more. Okay, with other things. So there are penalties for using copyrighted content. Prof, I hope that answers your question. That's why it's better to err on the side of caution and be careful when we deposit content. Prof Chu, again, for that one, we do not have an internal watchdog. Okay, we rely on the trust between it's academic integrity and trust. We don't have an internal watchdog to monitor the content. Okay, so thank you for all the questions. If you have any other questions, I can take. Whatever I can answer, because some of the aspects of legal, we'll have to revert back to our legal department. But that's what it's clear regarding copyright, because when we deposit content on any website using UMS logo and using a UMS attribution as UMS staff, we actually are liable for that content. So the university will not be liable if I create content which violates copyright. I will be liable. So whatever I infringe is my liability. Okay. Yes, Dr. Siva, there is a lot of content which is free. For example, you go to Pixabay, Free Pix. They have there's a lot. In fact, there are millions and millions of images which are free to use and which you can repurpose. But we attribute it, even though it's copyright free, what we call as PD, public domain. Okay, then again, Dr. Sufyan asked about the politically sensitive content. That is one area we just avoid it completely. Political or sensitive content usually avoid. This is actually faced by social science lecturers who do surveys, and then they have issues regarding the, for example, they conduct a survey in the Kampung or Bandar, and then everyone gives their opinion, and sometimes that is politically sensitive. So in that case, it's better not to deposit this kind of content online because it will create controversy. Yes, the energy, it can be also regarding your electric consumption and faults and internet data. This can all be very sensitive. So there is no guideline for that, Dr. Sufyan. But it's best to avoid anything which is politically, religiously, or culturally sensitive in the OER system, because it will go in the public domain. And public domain is accessible by all.
Any more questions from the floor?
Any other question? Today is a bad day. I cannot hear anyone's voice because of the internet, I guess.
Just kind of reminder, actually, there's a link for you to key in for your attendance, which we will apply for. We will apply for CPD points.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. Thank you very much, Nora, and thank you, Juan Salmi and Juan Eugenia. Thank you very much for spending so much time. I have taken up about 1.5 of your time. So I hope you have learned something. And anything you have any problem, sometime you have problem with the system, please email us. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Sufyan. Yeah. So Dr. Sufyan asked about the FKJ. Usually we have the newsletter, right? Majala, or the bulletin, what we call. So in UMS, this one can be actually, you can actually get an EISSN number from Perpustaka Negara for the newsletter. So if you have a newsletter and it is, okay, you can actually deposit the newsletter as a single submission, because it's already compiled into one document. So in that case, we have to submit it as a single submission, Dr. Sufyan. But the articles within that can be deposited by the individual lecturers as a individual article, because this is actually the Ccbi philosophy. You can repurpose content. Okay, you can, for example, I produce one article, you produce one article, it can all be combined into an article and repurpose, provided you acknowledge in the bulletin that all this content is from the respective lecturers or the respective students, and so on and so forth. Okay, Dr. Sufyan, hopefully answer the question. Yeah, that's correct. Each contributor should benefit. So they can deposit the article independently as under their name, and then you can compile it all together in the bulletin. You can do that. That's perfectly acceptable, because many of the websites do this. The website will have it will be a website, but it will have content from different sources, blogs and articles and PDF, but it's all compiled in a lecture, into one content, into one page. Okay, chapter in book. For chapter in book, we usually, if you have an EISBN number, again, it should be as one book. Okay, for this one, I wouldn't recommend, because the chapters should be compiled in a single book. For this case, it's only the book, not the individual contributor. But the individual contributor will get attribution, because in the list of authors, you will actually list out each and every author from the article. So it's the same as depositing a separate chapter. But for books, I think it would be better if you had a single EISBN number, and then the book is as a single content with the authors acknowledged. A book is different from open source journal, because once you get a EISBN number and you deposit in a repository, it will become similar to an open access article. Open access, what is known as the open resource journal, which you refer to. Yeah, the same. So it's similar to open access, but as you note, inside UMS or OER, there's a more restrictive access. So it's non-commercial and share alike.
Okay, so any more questions from other members? Please ask now before we end this briefing.
Dr. Madharin asked about the same resources. In what context, Dr. Madharin? You mean you publish the same resource 2 times? this one means you're referring to what Dr. Sufyan mentioned earlier. Is it like one bulletin which multiple?
No, in different
I think
sites.
you'll have to type, Dr. Madirin. Cannot hear tidak boleh dengar.
Sorry.
Okay, different type. Actually, the ebook, when we deposit ebook is as one content. But suppose in the ebook you have different articles, we cannot redeposit them as different articles unless you are compilation, unless your ebook is compilation of other articles. So that means everyone deposited their chapter in, for example, in the OER, a separate chapter, and then you decide to compile after 1 year into an ebook. That one can be done. But the thing is that in any case, right, in your ebook, when you deposit ebook, you still have to attribute each author from the article. So it's the same thing. It's redundant. It's the same thing which you're doing again. So it will still be captured under the Myrasco or the ELNPT because their name will be in the original, in the book which you submit. Okay, so that is the same thing. PDF in OER and UMS. Okay, so suppose you publish ebook. Okay, in OER UMS you can publish your PDF in OER UMS and then publish ebook in under platform. Okay, now you have to check the, okay, for this has actually happened a case earlier. Some of the lecturers, they prepared a PDF and they deposited in the repository, and then they want to publish the book and sell. Okay, so now if you see the UMS license, right, it is CC BY NC and share alike. So in that case you can publish your ebook but you cannot sell it. Okay, you can, so if you deposited your PDF in OER UMS and then you publish the ebook exactly as it is without changing it, you cannot sell it. That's the disadvantage. So the lecturers wanted to commercialize that book because it's a very beautiful book with a lot of photographs, but they could not do it because the UMS is actually NC. So if you want to go in for commercial, as I mentioned earlier, don't deposit in the repository as a free book. Okay, thank you, Dr. Madirin. Any other question you have?
Okay, so is there any other questions from participants?
Okay, thank you very much for Dr. Sufyan. Thank you very much for inviting PEP to the faculty to deliver this tutorial and this workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kenneth, for coming to FKJ specifically to give this briefing. Hopefully, we benefit from this particular briefing, especially the information on how to publish our work and clarify some of the things and concerns that we have, especially when we upload our material in the OER system. So I believe we have.
Thank you for attending the session.
So I believe we have reached towards the end of our session.
Dr. Sufyan, with your permission, we can close the session. Do you have anything else to inform the lecturer? Okay, thank you very much. Please stay safe because we are having lots of cases, and please stay safe and follow your SOP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kenneth. Thank you very much for your insightful presentations. And to continue to what I said, we have reached
bye-bye. See you all.
The end of our.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. We have reached to the end of our session. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and looking forward to see you in the future for further briefing and talks and such. Thank you again, everyone. See you again. Bye-bye.